So my name is Gautam Singh, and I'm a visiting fellow at the University of Arts in London. I'm really looking forward to today to have this conversation about the work of Audre Lorde.
I'm Terry Finnegan. I'm Head of Student Attainment at London College of Fashion, and I'm also one of the lead tutors of the Inclusive Teaching Learning Unit.
And I actually came to Audre Lorde when I was doing my masters in the kind of mid-80s, and the book itself that we're going to be discussing was published in 1984, so it was pretty new at the time, and it was mind-blowing, you know. And ever since, I've never kind of put that book down, really. It's always on my shelf. And I know that you've come to the book more recently.
Yeah, I have, indeed.
So, I mean, Audre Lorde, she's quite a complex character, actually. Somebody who is constantly engaged in kind of self-discovery, but is also very determined not to be labelled. And, you know, the whole question of diversity and the relationship between diversity and power resonate in a lot of her work. And she does come from a very interesting multicultural background and a racially charged kind of life, really. Her growing up in Harlem in New York, her family from a Caribbean background. Her father was very dark-skinned, but her mother was very light-skinned. In fact, enough to actually pass as a white woman. And that also there were some tensions in the home around that. So her relationship wasn't that good with her parents, but she was taught by her mother. Initially, actually was taught at home, and storytelling was a very important mechanism. And I think the other interesting thing about Audre Lorde was that apparently at a young age she had communication problems. She couldn't. Felt that she couldn't express herself. Although in poetic form she could, and in fact, so she used to often respond in poetry. So from a very young age, she almost felt like kind of born to be a poet. And I think most people, you know, first and foremost see her as a poet, and that poetry was her first love. Yeah. But she was recognised as a gifted student, and you know, went on to become a celebrated librarian. I mean, I think before her death, she was the poet laureate and the chief librarian for New York State, and she studied at Columbia University. And in 1984, which was also when the book was published, she started a visiting professorship in West Berlin at the Free University of Berlin, which was a really important point as well in how her work was embraced by a whole lot of other people. You know, she comes from a black feminist tradition, but she herself would have thought she doesn't belong to that. I mean, in fact, she belongs everywhere and nowhere, as I would say sometimes. Yeah. In fact, the book itself that we're going to discuss, Sister Outsider, is an interesting oxymoron. She's talking as an outsider, but she's also talking as a sister, kind of in and out. And I think that's a very interesting part of her work. So she refuses to be placed in any particular category, and again that comes through a lot of her work. Whether that was to do with social categories or even literally in terms of physical appearance. She felt that physical appearance wasn't what made our identities, although that's often how diversity and difference is constructed. And in fact, she was really keen to move beyond these kind of stereotypical representations of identity. And she, you know, is often, in the quotes we'll be exploring this piece, she often talked herself as being a lesbian mother, warrior poet, yeah? And she'd use poetry to get across what that meant for her. So she's interested in identity, difference and power, and how these things kind of push and pull and construct our lives. The other interesting thing is that her work is often rejected as being not particularly philosophical. It's discursive. It's narrative form. But actually, there is a very deep philosophical current running through her work, and I think perhaps one of the most famous quotes, and again it's in Sister Outsider, when she talks about the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. They may allow us temporarily to beat him at his own game, but they will never enable us to bring about genuine change. And this fact is only threatening to those women who still define the master's house as their only source of support. And I think there's a deep kind of challenge to, I think, certain forms of Western, maybe Enlightenment, male-centered kind of white kind of forms of knowledge production. As I say, she did succumb to cancer. She had cancer for about 14 years, and initially it was a breast cancer, and then it became a liver cancer. But she also actually wrote a book about that. It was called the Cancer Diaries, I think they were called, where she kept her kind of, and she used to have conversations with Adrienne Rich about that whole experience of, as it were, the body being in the hands of the medical profession. It's a very interesting insight into that. And before she died, she actually changed her name. She called herself Gamba Adisa, which literally means warrior, she who makes her meaning known. So, to the day that she died, that she was actually, in a sense, remaking herself all the time.
My experience of knowing about Audre Lorde is much more recent, basically, and it is about being at Angela Davis's talk at Women of the World at South Bank, and basically how she refers to her. And I suddenly realised there was a key theorist that I really needed to understand, particularly around inclusive education, because I would say that isn't my area of research, particularly the work that I do with members of staff on a postgraduate certificate around teaching, to understand about what that means. And for me, I think, having very recently read the book, I would agree totally with Gurnham that it is actually life-changing, and it does make you think very differently. But it also, in a way, for me, was like coming home, because when we started the Inclusive Learning Unit, we started it using the theories of critical pedagogy and social justice from Freire, and understanding that actually, if we were going to work with staff in creative subjects, art and design, about inclusion, about understanding about this, and giving them a chance to reflect and think about it. We were looking more about curriculum and pedagogies and all of those very important things, but actually, for me, it was like coming home, because it was like understanding it. She talks about intersectionality, she talks about identity, she talks about the subjective approach to all of this, and she mentions Freire, and actually, it's very powerful, because and she talks about the anger of feeling anger about, and she talks about racism, and she talks about transforming, but real transforming, which is a different thing, getting change in a different place as opposed to with the Master's House. So I think it's very powerful, and I do think it is something that all staff who are looking at wanting to understand better about how to teach better and how to work with students better need to really start grappling and think about and reflect on and discuss this work.
I think that's a really good summary, and I think it's really important to recognise. I think that essentially Audre Lorde is a teacher, just like Paulo Freire were teachers, and so she doesn't give you long tracts of kind of philosophical thought, and she actually, sometimes it's a poem, sometimes it's a letter, sometimes it's extract, fragment from a speech. In fact, the book itself is Sister Outsider, essays and speeches. Sometimes it's an exchange, and I think there's a kind of humanising in the way in which she actually gets the reader to think about the world for themselves, and that's, for me, the best kind of pedagogy, isn't it? Absolutely, I totally agree. I think the other important thing about her work is that it's not abstract, it's very situated. And so even in the book, Sister Outsider, the conversations he has about which is the human condition is through questions of looking at racism, homophobia, class, ageism, heterosexism, gender oppression. So, she moves from the concrete to the ideal in a very, which is, I think, is what the best kind of forms of education do. Because education is about dealing with the world as it is, but also about imagining a different world, an alternative world, maybe a creative. And I think she does that really beautifully, both through the content of what she's presenting, but also, I think, through the kind of genres that she uses, even the genre of writing. There's no distinction between, say, the first, second, or third person. She can move. And I know that sometimes people are criticised for writing in the first person, but actually, if teaching and learning is about anything, it's about, in essence, getting in touch with the first person.